Welcome to the Chemistry, Biology and Math Revision Hub. Today we are going through the A-level biology topics. This is control of the internal environment. I would like to thank you all for viewing our channel. Our channel has increased in viewership, but we need more subscribers. As you know, subscriptions make a channel grow, so I'm depending on you so that the channel can consistently grow. So please do subscribe so that we can journey together. Beginning with topic 7C1, homeostasis and hormones. Hormones are organic chemicals produced in endocrine glands, and they are released into the blood, where they are transported to several target areas around the body. Hormones can either be protein-based or peptide hormones like insulin and ADH, or they could be steroid hormones like the sex hormones testosterone as well as estrogen. Once a hormone is secreted like we see here, it's going to be secreted into the blood, and then it's going to be transported through the blood until the target organ. The target organ has a receptor, we can see this one here, that is complementary to the specific hormone. So the hormone is going to bind with a complementary receptor in order to cause an effect within that specific cell. Moving on to glands. Glands can be endocrine or they can be exocrine. Exocrine glands are not involved in hormonal production, so I'm going to exclude those out. My main topic here is focusing on hormones, so I'll focus on the endocrine glands. These produce hormones into the bloodstream, and they are associated with specific organs. They're also surrounded by plenty of blood capillaries within the tissues of the gland, and these capillaries are going to take up the hormones as soon as they're produced in order for them to be transported around the body. So examples of endocrine glands include the thyroid glands. We can see them here. These participate in metabolism, or they control the metabolic rate as well as growth. Then we have the parathyroid glands. We can see here. They help to regulate calcium or in calcium metabolism within the body. We have the pancreas, which is here. This regulates the blood sugar level within the body. It produces two specific hormones. One is called glucagon and the other is called insulin, which control or participate in homeostasis of blood glucose. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. We go to the ovaries. These participate in production of female sex hormones. The testes, these secrete the male sex hormones like testosterone. We go to the pituitary gland, which is the master gland. This controls all the other glands, meaning it produces substances that stimulate the other glands in order to go into action or to produce specific hormones. We have the adrenal glands, which are these ones here on top of the kidneys. These release adrenaline hormone and other hormones that are responsible in the fight or flight response. Another thing we have to include, again talking about glands, like I said already, we have endocrine and exocrine. Exocrine glands produce secretions through ducts, and endocrine glands produce secretion without ducts, so we call them ductless glands. And in this case, the pancreas is both an endocrine gland and exocrine gland. It's endocrine, like we already said, because it produces glucagon as well as insulin, and it's exocrine because it produces digestive enzymes. Hormones can be released from these glands due to nerve stimulation, or it could be due to chemical stimulation. The nervous system stimulates the endocrine glands in order to produce hormones. The level of stimulation can determine the level of the response. If it's stimulated much, then there is going to be greater release of the hormones. For example, the sympathetic nervous system stimulates the adrenal medulla of the adrenal gland to release adrenaline, and also the pituitary gland in the brain secretes several hormones that directly stimulate other endocrine glands. These include the thyroid stimulating hormone, the follicle stimulating hormones. Those stimulate other glands in order to produce other hormones. We can go to chemical stimulation. Here, the presence of some chemicals which are appropriate, like glucose in the bloodstream, stimulate the release of hormones. As the hormonal levels rise, the amount of the stimulating chemical in the body or in the blood could drop. This could lead to the endocrine glands receiving less stimulation, and so the hormone levels drop. This is basically through negative feedback or the negative feedback loop, and it gives better sensitivity, or the body has better control in adjusting to the constant needs of the body. Going on to the pituitary gland. The pituitary gland is located in the brain. It produces and releases secretions that affect most of the other endocrine glands in the body. It has an anterior lobe as well as a posterior lobe, like we can see here. We have this one here, which is posterior, and then we have an anterior pituitary. Different hormones are released from the different sections of the pituitary gland. The hypothalamus, which is this one here, is the region above the pituitary gland. It monitors the level of some metabolites and hormones in the blood and stimulates the pituitary gland in response to variations in concentrations of the chemicals within the body. This hypothalamus contains secretory cells. Some of these produce substances that stimulate or inhibit the release of hormones from the pituitary gland, mainly the anterior pituitary. Other cells produce secretions that are stored in the posterior pituitary and are released later as hormones. So the anterior pituitary produces 6 hormones, while the posterior produces 2 hormones. At least those that are examined at A level, we can see the ADH here, oxytocin, TSH, we can see ACTH, PRL, and so on. So the first one is the thyroid stimulating hormone, which controls the secretion of thyroxine and triiodothyronine from the thyroid gland. We have the growth hormone that controls growth of the body cells and buildup of proteins. We have the adrenocorticotrophic hormone, which controls secretions from the adrenal cortex of the adrenal glands. We have the follicle-stimulating hormones, FSH, which stimulate egg maturation and estrogen production in females. They also stimulate sperm production in males. We have luteinizing hormone, which is LH, and this stimulates ovulation in females, as well as testosterone production in males. We have prolactin. This stimulates milk production from mammary glands in females. There is also oxytocin. This stimulates contractions and brings about labor in females. Then we have ADH. This stimulates the tubules and the collecting ducts to absorb more water. Moving on to how hormones work, here we're going to be talking about the peptide hormones versus the steroid hormones. These work in 2 different ways. One can be by releasing of a second messenger, and the other can be by directly entering the cell. Peptide hormones, also called protein hormones, include insulin, adrenaline, ADH, and these are not soluble in lipid, and so they cannot cross the cell membrane directly. These hormones bind to a receptor in the cell membrane, and then they lead to a series of membrane-bound reactions that occur, resulting in the formation of a second chemical messenger inside the cell. The second messenger is usually cyclic AMP, then activates enzymes within the cell, altering the cell's metabolism. And the cyclic AMP binds to other chemicals within the cell to pass into the nucleus and act as DNA transcription factors. This is going to lead to changes like increased cellular respiration. For steroid hormones, these include sex hormones like testosterone as well as estrogen. These are soluble in lipids, so they can pass through the cell membrane directly, and they do bind onto receptors, forming a hormone receptor complex, which passes through the nuclear pore into the nucleus. The receptors they bind to are found inside the cell, so they form a complex, and then the complex enters the nucleus. This complex acts as a transcription factor, regulating the expression of genes. Going on to topic 7C2, osmoregulation in mammals, beginning with the kidneys. I'm going to begin with the role of the liver in protein metabolism. We know the body cannot store excess amino acids, so these have to be deaminated. They go through the process of deamination. When this occurs, ammonia, which is toxic, is going to be produced first, as we can see here. And this ammonia is going to enter into the ornithine cycle, where it's going to be converted into something less toxic, which is urea. And this urea is going to be passed into the blood as waste that has to be removed by the kidneys. Looking at this image here, we can see the location of the kidneys. They are 1 and 2. We have the left and the right side. And on top of the kidneys, that's where we have the adrenal glands. So the kidneys are connected to a ureter that passes the urine from the kidneys into the bladder. And then from the bladder, there is a urethra here, this one here, that passes the urine to the outside part of the body. Here I'm looking at the cross-section through the kidney, this image here. We have the cortex. This is rich in blood capillaries, so you can see the color is dark red, and it contains the Malpighian bodies, which are basically the glomerulus and the Bowman's capsule. The next part is the medulla, which contains the loops of Henle of various nephrons. Then we have the pelvis. This is where the urine is going to collect when it comes out of the collecting duct before it goes into the ureter. Now here we have 2 types of nephrons. We have the juxtamedullary nephron, which has a longer loop of Henle, and we can see it penetrates all the way throughout the whole medulla. On the other side, we have the corticonephron that has a shorter part of the loop in the medulla. We have the pyramid, where we see a collection of tubules as well as collecting ducts and blood vessels. Like I said already, the ureter carries the urine from the kidney down into the bladder. Going on to the nephron, this is the most important part, where filtration occurs as well as reabsorption of some components back into the blood. During osmoregulation, the kidney nephrons carry out ultrafiltration. Ultrafiltration occurs in this section here. Then there is selective reabsorption that occurs in here. And then water reabsorption that could occur here, as well as around the collecting ducts if ADH hormone stimulates more reuptake of water. Remember, water can be reabsorbed from the filtrate in this section as well as in the descending loop, but more reabsorption based on the release of ADH or not could occur in this region here. So during ultrafiltration, I'm concentrating on this section here where ultrafiltration occurs. The diameter of the afferent blood vessels or afferent arteria, we can see this is bigger in comparison to the other. So due to the difference in the diameter of the two arterioles, it creates pressure that is going to cause the ultrafiltration to occur efficiently within the glomerulus into the bone marrow space. So plasma is going to pass out of the capillaries and everything else passes out of the capillaries except blood cells and the largest plasma proteins. The filtrate, which contains substances like glucose, amino acids, urea, and so on, enters into the Bowman's capsule space. The concentration of these substances in the Bowman's capsule space is similar to the way they were in the blood. Then those substances are going to go through the proximal convoluted tubule, or sometimes called the first coil tubule, where selective reabsorption is going to occur. Here we have an example of how selective reabsorption can occur, and you can see in the region where it occurs there is a lot of mitochondria. The mitochondria are there to carry out respiration, provide ATP, because the uptake of some of these substances is going to be by active transport. We can see there are sodium-potassium pumps for the uptake of these ions by active transport. We also see more folding around the membrane. There are a lot of microvilli to increase the surface area for the reabsorption of these substances. 100% of the glucose has to be reabsorbed. Some water is going to be reabsorbed. Some sodium chloride is going to be reabsorbed. And the reabsorption for water we can see is by osmosis. Glucose is going to be facilitated diffusion as well as active transport. Remember, 100% of the glucose has to be reabsorbed. In this reuptake, sodium ions are going to be actively transported. The chloride ions and water will follow passively down the concentration gradient. And once these substances have moved from the tubule into the intermembrane space, they are passed by diffusion into the capillaries surrounding the tubules. Because the blood is continuously taking away the substances that have been reabsorbed, the concentration gradient is going to be maintained. Now the filtrate leaves the region to go to the loop of Henle. Moving on to the loop of Henle and the countercurrent multiplier effect. Here we're talking about the efficiency of the loop in removing some of the ions from the filtrate so that more water can be reabsorbed in the collecting duct as well as in the second coil tubule or the distal convoluted tubule. After selective reabsorption, when the filtrate reaches here, it's going to be isotonic. So we can see water is going to leave into the surrounding tissues. The reason for this is the ascending loop is permeable to sodium ions, or meaning they're going to be actively pumped out. So the sodium ions are going to increase the concentration of ions around this region. And when it increases, since the descending loop is permeable to water, water is going to leave it by osmosis to the surrounding tissues where there is a higher concentration. So as the filtrate goes down, its concentration is going to increase due to the increased loss of water, and by the time it reaches this lower part, it's going to be hypertonic. And now we go to the ascending loop. The lower part of the ascending loop is going to be fairly permeable to sodium and chloride. We do not need to use active transport, so those are going to leave. But as we go above here, active transport is required. The chloride ions are going to be pumped out of this limb, and the sodium ions are going to follow. The filtrate is losing more of the ions, and by the time it reaches this region here, it's going to be hypotonic, meaning it has more water in comparison to the surrounding tissues. So there is a higher chance of more water reabsorption in the distal convoluted tubule as well as in the collecting ducts if ADH hormone is released because the filtrate concentration has been balanced out. The distal convoluted tubule is permeable to water, but permeability can be increased due to the ADH hormone. It's here and in the collecting ducts that the body balances its water needs. If there is not enough salt in the body, then sodium can be actively pumped out of the tubule with chloride ions down an electrochemical gradient, and then water leaves by diffusion if the walls of the tubule are permeable at that time. Now, in the collecting ducts, the permeability, of course, is going to depend on the ADH hormone. Here, water moves out of the collecting ducts down a water potential gradient as it passes through the medulla with its high levels of sodium and chloride ions. And as the water leaves the collecting ducts, the urine is going to become steadily more concentrated. The concentration of the sodium ions in the surrounding fluid increases through the medulla towards the pelvis of the kidney, so water can be removed along the whole length of the collecting ducts. And this makes it possible for the kidneys to produce very hypertonic urine when it's necessary to conserve water in the body. Now, like I said already, the urine produced is going to collect in the pelvis first, but it's going to be passed out through the ureter to the bladder where it's going to be stored. Once the bladder is full, the sphincter muscles are going to be stimulated for urination, and then the urine is going to pass through the urethra to the outside of the body. Moving on to topic 7C3, control of the kidney and homeostasis. Homeostatic control of the kidney is carried out by ADH hormone, and these go through negative feedback. ADH hormone helps to maintain the water and iron concentration within a certain range. It increases the permeability of the collecting ducts and the distal convoluted tubules to water. This hormone is produced in the hypothalamus and it's secreted into the posterior lobe of the pituitary gland where it is stored. The osmoreceptors in the hypothalamus will detect a change in the concentration of blood plasma, and so they'll send nerve impulses to the posterior pituitary gland, leading to the release of the stored hormone. ADH is transported through the blood to the kidneys, and in the kidneys it binds to receptor cells, causing reactions that lead to CAMP formation. The CAMP causes vesicles containing water transport channel proteins to fuse with the membrane. Then the water transport proteins are going to be inserted into the membrane. They make the membrane more permeable to water by osmosis, and this decreases the volume of the glomerular filtrate, which increases the concentration of the urine. Moving on to topic 7C4, thermoregulation and exercise. If the core body temperature is higher or if the surrounding temperatures are higher, then more heat has to be lost from the body. If they are lower, then we find ways of conserving heat. Warming up the body occurs from metabolic heat, while cooling down can occur in evaporation from the skin and respiratory surfaces. Heat can be lost or gained by radiation to and from the environment as electromagnetic waves, conduction to or from the environment on interaction with surfaces, and convection from or to air and water as convection currents set up around the hot object. Moving on to the structure of the skin, we can see the skin has the upper layer we call the epidermis. We have the dermis, which is the middle layer, and then the fat layer, that is for insulation. We also see their blood vessels. These include capillaries, which are really small. We also have the hair follicle, which is attached to some muscle we can see here, which is an erector muscle. We also have sebaceous glands. These produce oil. We have sweat glands where sweat is going to be produced. And of course, we also have some nerves that are going to stimulate some activity within the skin. So basically, the skin is a thermoregulatory organ for organisms that are endothermic. It ensures that the core body temperature is maintained in dynamic equilibrium, meaning the skin participates in homeostasis. It avoids the surface of the skin of the body from cooling up too much or from warming up too much. In ensuring a stable body temperature, water evaporates from surfaces like the mouth, the nose, as well as any moist surfaces. And because the skin is rich in blood capillaries, like we see here, if the temperatures are higher, then more blood reaches the surface of the skin so that more evaporation can occur in order to cause cooling. We can see that here. So in control of the body temperature, when it's hot, we're going to see some vasodilation, meaning there is more blood pushed to the blood vessels closer to the surface of the skin. When this occurs, more heat is going to be lost by radiation as well as conduction. And that occurs because there is less blood flowing through the shunt vessel. When the surrounding temperatures are cooler, the shunt vessel is going to be wider, more blood flows through it, and less blood is going to go through the blood vessels reaching the surface of the skin. So less heat is going to be lost through radiation, and so the body temperature could be maintained. We can see constriction of the blood capillaries occurs, so less blood is going to be sent through the blood vessels closer to the surface of the skin, and that prevents excessive heat loss from the body, maintaining the core body temperature as required. When the body temperature rises, also the erector pili muscles are going to relax and the body hairs will lie flat on the body or against the body, decreasing the insulation or the insulating layer that is trapped next to the skin. This, however, has a low effect in humans because humans have less body hair. The sweat glands produce sweat, which evaporates at the surface of the skin, causing cooling. When the body temperature drops, the erector pili muscles contract, pulling the hairs upright. The insulating fat layer reduces heat loss, and then shivering could occur so that more heat or metabolic heat is generated to warm up the body. This homeostatic control is seen here. the core body temperature normally is going to be 37 degrees. If the temperature rises, receptors in the skin as well as those in the hypothalamus are going to detect a change. They will communicate by the nervous system to the thermoregulatory center. This is a region in the hypothalamus. Then the hypothalamus is going to send nerve impulses to the effectors. Because temperature has increased, effectors are going to be the skin, the liver, and so on. So the skin will participate in the homeostatic control, and the metabolism in the liver is going to decrease, so less metabolic heat is generated. So in the skin, the sphincter muscles of the superficial arteries will relax, the hair erector muscles will relax, so the hairs are going to lie flat, sweat glands will produce more sweat, muscles of the diaphragm and the rib cage may cause more panting. And these all are going to work at lowering the body temperature so that it can be returned to normal. If the body temperature falls, again the receptors in the skin as well as in the hypothalamus are going to detect that change. They'll send nerve impulses to the thermoregulatory center in the hypothalamus. This is going to send communication through the nervous system to the effectors. Now, since the core body temperature is lower, we need the liver to carry out more metabolism so that metabolic heat can increase. Also, we need the skin to participate in causing less heat loss from the body. So the sphincter muscles of the superficial arterioles will contract, and the hair erector muscles are going to contract, so the hairs will stand up. There is going to be more shivering in the muscles. The adrenomedullary glands are going to increase adrenaline, and we know adrenaline prepares the body for activity, so there is going to be more activity in the body to generate more metabolic heat. Cooling is going to be reduced, and warming is going to be increased so that the body temperature is raised, returning everything to normal. So this brings us to the end of this video on control of the internal environment. Thank you for being with us. Do not forget to subscribe. See you in the next video. Bye-bye.